extremely bad. I don't know if you have every time you know yourself, like everything is extremely bad. But I think it's true now.
It's a little daunting to stand here and introduce Professor Rose to you for any number of reasons. My mouth's gone completely dry in anticipation of doing it, so bear with me as the words come out. It's daunting for a number of reasons. A man of Professor Rose's tremendous gifts is someone that is not easy to describe to you in a few words before his talk. And one hesitates, one is almost paralyzed to utter the few one has time to utter. Also, the fact that Professor Rose is retiring to England after 20 years of teaching at this university tempts one to review in a kind of languorous and nostalgic way the many years, the many achievements, and the many great moments of our time together here. Of course, that might eclipse Professor Rose's lecture, so that would. And also, one also is daunted by the relation to one's teachers. One always remains a student to one's teachers. The first time, and so I will make this brief. Again. The first time I heard Jasper Rose's name, I was in a car in December of 1965 on the way to a party in Los Angeles, going over Benedict Canyon or Kublai Canyon, Daley Canyon, Laurel Canyon. And a friend who was invited, going to the same party, was on winter break from Cowell College and said, I have this wonderful, wonderful teacher. He invited us to his house for dinner, and we had this wonderful meal, and he gave us our class there. And it just was a great thing. He was full of enthusiasm, and the name of the teacher was Professor Jasper Rose, and that was the first time I heard it, and fortunately I didn't forget it. It was a very moving thing to hear as a little high school senior. I shouldn't say little high school senior. As a high school senior, to hear that college could be like this. That professors could invite you to their homes, and you could see their books, and you could have a meal with them. This was a tremendous. I never got over it then, and I still haven't gotten over it. I think always thought of it as one of the, somehow, an extra potential of this university, Cowell College. So I came to Cowell College, and when I arrived, I found that knowledge can be pretty dry porridge. And again, I think if any place could convince you that wasn't the truth, this university and Cowell College in particular was the place, because it wasn't really dry porridge in Cowell College, and it was a wonderful experience. But I could see from friends of mine in other colleges, and I could see from the occasional class that I would take, that knowledge by itself is pretty dry porridge. But fortunately for the wisdom of many people, Paige Smith, for one, who's in the group today, the fact that there are other ways of knowing besides book learning and the conventional and the knowledge that the 20th century oppresses us with was something that was made really alive in Cowell College, something that was part of our lives as undergraduates, and it was made alive in no greater way than in the person of Professor Rose, who brought to bear into the life of the college the arts in a way that realized their potential. The potential of the arts as opposed to the weight of knowledge that is not connected to human life. The potential of the arts is that it allows us to know things in a variety of ways. And I think this is a great gift that I received from Cowell College, in particular from Professor Rose, because the college was filled, the life of the college was filled for a variety of reasons and with occasions that were occasions that raised us up as a community and raised us up inside of ourselves in ways that books by themselves won't do, or lectures by themselves won't do or can't do. And I sometimes think that the word entertainment in American, I sometimes think this partly because of having had Professor Rose as a teacher, that the word entertainment in American life is used very cheaply and very vulgarly, and it's thought to be a kind of a minor event. If this is the case, it's because we make our entertainments so vulgar and so cheap and so unworthy of our best selves. And when we make our entertainments as good as they can be, for example, in the Shakespeare readings that Professor Rose, Provost Rose instituted in the Singing of Messiah in Cowell College, when we take advantage of the arts of man and make them, bring them to life and make them what they can be, then the word entertainment is not a trivial word at all. And Professor Rose has brought that quality to the university over and over again, continuously, nonstop, for the many years that he's been here. And he's been able to do that because of the scope of his attention to the arts, his natural attention to the arts. It's not, I mean, here in this room you see the work of former students and you see some of Professor Rose's own paintings and printings and writings, but the truth of the matter is that there are many little cracks and crevices in the world of the arts that bind all of the arts as a whole together, and writing and illustrating and illuminating and singing and playing music and theatrical roles are in some preternatural way connected. And I've always felt that Professor Rose is like an agent of the one muse before the muses broke up into 9 muses. He's like an agent of the, if I may say so, of the one muse who is looking down and keeping an eye. Now, here some people are saying there's writing and there's picture, but there's a world in between writing and picture. There's an aesthetic world in between there. And there's the world of poetry and the world of the written display of poetry. And there's a world in between there. And who is looking out for this? The world, the specialized world that breaks things into compartments, leaves things alone, and divides things into smaller and smaller pieces, destroys in a way the thing that the arts can give us more than anything else, the sense of unifying, the sense of putting together. And in drama, in theater, in writing, in poetry, in declamation, in all of these many things, Professor Rose has given his gifts generously to Cowell College and to the university because of his gift of performance. And I must stop now. I feel myself going on much too long, but I have to simply say that the only thing that even tempted me to accept the daunting job of speaking a few words of introduction to Professor Rose is simply my great admiration and affection for him. And I know that many people who have been the happy recipients of his gifts at the university these years join me in that gratitude and affection. And I think the one thing, in closing, the one thing that Professor Rose is I'm most grateful to, that he brings to bear in the world, is that he brings the works of man, the works of art that man achieves through his skill, through his constant attention, and through his efforts and through his struggles, that those works that try to illuminate life for us all, Professor Rose has a gift of bringing those works to life. And that's what he does continuously, and that's what I'm sure he has in store for us, and that's what I'm most grateful to him for. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, I feel a little bit as though one had gone out to dinner and one wasn't anticipating heady drinks before dinner, and one wasn't anticipating lobster and champagne for a first course, and one wasn't anticipating a wonderful veal ragout for a second course. And I feel that I'm now just a delightful, I hope, dessert. A little piece of syllabub. I also have to say how too much touched, in a way, simply from the point of view of being able to say anything, I am to see so many of my friends here in such fundamentally hallowed spot, and not only my living friends, but on the table over there is a somewhat grubby copy, but nonetheless a moving copy of Thackeray's Vanity Fair. And that was one of the first books in which I ever learnt of the values of cynicism and the importance of having 5,000 a year in the 3%, and the danger of women with green eyes was to me a great revelation. And then that very nice guitar music touched me also, because very long ago, long before the guitar had become the lingua franca of all young people on the move, and the ideal instrument of all nomads, I adored the guitar, and the little piece that you played, I first heard played by the great Andreas Segovia in a concert in Cambridge. And I was so enthusiastic about the guitar that I'd asked 2 or 3 of my friends to come. And we sat in the Guildhall, which is an enormous room with a huge and very ugly organ at the back of it. And I don't know whether you know what Segovia looks like, or looked like. I'm not sure whether he's still alive. But he was a person who had hands like great bands of country sausages. I mean, you've never seen such nimble or large or muscular sausages in your life. And he also had a very vague look on his face. He came in. Just about nobody had ever been to a guitar concert for a very, very long time. You know, there was this nice little stool, and he sat down, and then he put his head up into the air, and he looked very gently to and fro. His hands, these great sausages made a movement, and you couldn't hear anything. And then he looked balefully round behind him, and 3 city councillors nearly fainted because he didn't care for the noise of the heating, which surely wasn't air conditioning in those old days in England, but was some kind of panting, pounding steam creature, and was making too much noise. And then he struck off, and he struck off with just that piece that you were playing. So that touches me additionally. This is a lovely room to be in because, of course, it is the room devoted really to poetry and beauty in the University Library. I do have to say that I have another favourite room in the University Library, which I visit very, very frequently, which for some peculiar reason is right down in the dungeons, the slide library. Well, actually, the real reason is because the slides weigh so heavy on the floor, and they weigh so heavy, presumably, on everybody's sense of culture. But I couldn't possibly, this afternoon, not acknowledge the extraordinary and wonderful service which I've received at this university from my very dear, noble, and self-sacrificing and obedient children in the slide library, who day after day, whether I'm annoyed with the Chancellor, whether I'm annoyed with the Vice-Chancellor, whether I'm annoyed with the Chairman of a board, whether I'm annoyed with 300 or 400 or 500 students, listen to my foaming rage and assuage it with beautiful images. Well, I'm here to talk to you about poetry and book illustration, and Bruce Cantz was absolutely right in pinning me down as somebody who's not exactly a jack of all trades, but certainly not a master of all trades, but somebody who is wonderfully evasive between one art and another art, and I've never been able to make up my mind what I am. It seems to me that I'm undefinable and indigestible and a thorough twister. And there is a lovely song which came in just before the Beatles got going, which said, "Boys are such natural twisters," and I always like to think of myself as an absolutely natural twister. But yes, I do care about poetry, and I do care about books, and I care about English poetry, and I really thought that this occasion was the opportunity not to listen or to try to produce words of wisdom, but to enjoy some poetry. And I thought I could also be privileged or outrageous enough, without the privilege, to take the liberty to be autobiographical to some extent, and to do homage first to the great spirits of English poetry. And if I may, I'm going to read you first the first poem which I remember as striking me absolutely all of a heap. And I still think it's one of the 2 or 3 greatest poems in the English language. I have tried to illustrate it on occasion. I first illustrated it many years ago in a very strange technique. I had a very nice friend when I was an undergraduate at Cambridge who was going to put me on the map, but never quite did. So, you know, I'm just sort of on the other side. You know, it says road leading to, and that's where I am. But he introduced me to a technique which used gouache, very wet, on tracing paper. And the results were wonderful because the paper cockled and buckled and bubbled like some witch's cauldron. He then had a wonderful technician who flattened it down again, and it looked as though I had done an immense amount of very hard work, whereas of course all I'd done was thrash a little bit here and there. Anyhow, that's how I illustrated Kubla Khan. It wasn't a great success. But what a wonderful poem, if I may read it to you. It's very familiar to you. In Xanadu did Kublai Khan a stately pleasure dome decree, where out the sacred river ran through caverns measureless to man, down to a sunless sea. And when I was 8, I couldn't think of anything more beautiful or extraordinary than that sunless sea or those great measureless caverns. And ever since, Kublai Khan has accompanied me. So twice 5 miles of fertile ground, with walls and towers were girdled round. And there were gardens bright with sinuous rills, where blossomed many an incense-bearing tree. And here were forests ancient as the hills, enfolding sunny spots of greenery. But oh, that deep romantic chasm which slanted down the green hill that water-seed cover, a savage place, as holy and enchanted as ere beneath a waning moon was haunted by woman wailing for her demon lover. And from this chasm, with ceaseless turmoil seething, as if this earth in fast thick pants were breathing, a mighty fountain momently was forced. amid whose swift, half-intermittent burst huge fragments vaulted like rebounding hail, or chaffy grain beneath the thresher's flail. Amid these dancing rocks, at once and ever, it flung up momently the sacred river. 5 miles meandering with amazing motion, through wood and dale the sacred river ran, then reached the caverns measureless to man, and sank in tumult to a lifeless ocean. Amid this tumult, Kubla heard from far ancestral voices prophesying war. The shadow of the dome of pleasure floated midway on the waves, where was heard the mingled measure from the fountain and the caves. It was a miracle of rare device, a sunny pleasure dome with caves of ice. A damsel with a dulcimer in a vision once I saw. It was an Abyssinian maid, and on her dulcimer she played, singing of Mount Abara. Could I revive within me that symphony and song, to such a deep delight would win me, that with music loud and long I would build that dome in air, that sunny dome, those caves of ice, and all who heard should see them there, and all should cry, beware, beware, his flashing eyes, his floating hair, weave a circle round him thrice, and close your eyes with holy dread, for he on honeydew hath fed and drunk the milk of paradise. Well, how can one ever get over such an extraordinary poem, such a romantic vision? And of course, one of the things it really makes you realize is how visual an act so much poetry is, and how, in fact, the living voice cries out for the living image. And it has always fascinated me just how many English poets have also been painters. The great and well-known ones you can all recall, and we just enjoyed, indeed we're still enjoying, the marvellous exhibition of the Songs of Innocence and Experience, in which William Blake marries not heaven and hell, but marries word and face, tendril and tender versicle in the most magic way. He is, I suppose, our greatest poet-painter. But equally, and it's wonderful that we have such a great collection of him here, equally you will remember, of course, down to Gabriel Rossetti, who at the age of 17 could on the one hand produce a line like "The blessed damsel leaned out of the gold bar of heaven," and could do the most marvellous illustrations to Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven, and whose life consists of kind of fumy, elaborate, vinous, and then drug-besotted, magic, enchanted intertwining of poems and painting. But those are only just two. The 19th century is peculiarly rich. My own much beloved Thackeray illustrated his own novels. Didn't actually illustrate his own poetry, much of which is extremely charming. Most favourite one is his wonderful translation of Goethe's Sorrows of Werther. Werther had a love for Charlotte such as words could never utter. Would you know when first he met her? She was cutting bread and butter. Charlotte was a married lady, and a moral man was Werther, and for all the wealth of English would do nothing for to hurt her. So he pined and paled and ogled, and his passion boiled and bubbled, till he blew his silly brains out, and no more was by it troubled. Charlotte, when she saw his body born before her on a shutter, like a well-conducted person, went on cutting bread and butter. I suppose I've enjoyed that with a particular delight, because my father was a Goethe scholar, and I really could not abide the great Goethe, though, of course, Goethe, too, was another example of a poet who was also a draftsman, not a terribly good draftsman, but a draftsman. And then that extraordinary novelist and poet, who I'm sure is still the person to have written the best epic in English language in the 20th century, the Dinas, Thomas Hardy, was, after all, as a young man, an architect, and illustrated some of his own novels and poems. Less well known is the fact that Manley Hopkins occasionally did a little drawing, or that extraordinary, still little known and absolutely wonderful poet William Barnes did beautiful teeny wood engravings as a young man. And I could multiply instances. Perhaps the one that might join William Blake in the special collections here sooner or later is a marvellous Welshman called David Jones, who, a tender, shy, delicate soul, who was brought up for a while with the great and extraordinary typographer and engraver Eric Gill, and wrote a wonderful poem about the First World War, but was also a marvellous watercolourist, is the name that I should draw to your attention. He seems to me to be absolutely in the lineal descent of William Blake. Goethe. If I may, I should just tell you a teeny bit more about my father and how I came to know the sort of things that I did know. My father was a tall and extremely sweet, but really very austere and distant man. He was capable of being absolutely silent for 3 weeks. And I've always thought that that's a gift, absolutely unattainable. If I'm silent for 3 minutes, I think I'm doing pretty well. But it was, of course, somewhat scary. And relations between my father and my mother were sometimes strange because they used me as an intermediary. And my mother would say, we would sit at a small dining table, and my mother would say to me, would you ask your father if he'd care for some more pudding? And I would say nothing. And my father would say, tell your mother that no, I don't really care for any more pudding. And that would be the last remark he'd make for 3 weeks. But he was in many ways a passionate Victorian, a learned man, and he adored Dickens, and he adored the Victorian epoch. And as a small boy, I had to be literate because he insisted that I read Dickens out loud to him. And that was a difficult task because he would lie on a couch and criticize with his stomach. And he did this by just, whenever I made any kind of mispronunciation, he would have a silent giggle and his stomach would just sort of gently genuflect to and fro. And I remember at the very beginning of Great Expectations, you remember when Pip goes into the graveyard, there is a very peculiar word which occurs in the description, I think, of Pip's hair or something, but never mind what it was. And that word was A-W-R-Y. Now you try and think how, if you've never come across that word in your life before, A-W-R-Y might strike you. And so I read it out quite boldly. His hair was all awry. And my father thought that was the funniest thing you could possibly imagine. Anyhow, I suppose it was from him that I got my taste for Thackeray, and that I also got my taste for another poet who I learnt to admire very, very early, and whom I eventually came to illustrate. And when I came to illustrate him, I hadn't really thought how many other people have illustrated this poem. But it's a wonderful and strange poem, and again, I make no apologies for reading it to you. It's really much the nicest thing, if I can find it. Yes, it's in here. And I illustrated it in the direst black and white, and I illustrated it with a very deep sense of its meaning, because for a short while, when I was first married, and if I was lucky in my parents, I was even more lucky in my wife. When I was first married, we inhabited what is called a top shop. And a top shop is, in fact, a small manufactory. It had one coke tap. It had an extremely clanking water closet, which just stood in the corner of the lower room, curtained off. Upstairs was, on the other hand, very lovely because they needed lots of light for this little manufactory, so there were wonderful windows running down either side. But it was an extremely Victorian little building. And I used that house in my memory for these illustrations, just as I reused our own basement in another house, where all sorts of funny things had happened. And doors had come off the hinges, had been nailed on upside down. Very strange, but that Victorian world was still very much with us when I was a child. My father actually took me once to an eating house, which was still serving the food that it served to Charles Dickens. It hadn't improved in the last 70 or 80 years. It's a very Dickensian kind of trope there. And you were often sausages and peas, pie, pudding, by an extremely Dickensian woman who had eyes and sockets to those eyes, the most extraordinarily burnished, reddy brown, purple green, phosphorescent terror. And she probably would have enjoyed The Song of the Shirt by Thomas Hood. With fingers weary and worn, with eyelids heavy and red, a woman sat in unwomanly rags, plying her needle and thread. Stick, 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 in poverty, hunger and dirt, and still, with a voice of dolorous pitch, she sang the song of the shirt. Work, 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 while the cock is crowing aloof, and work, 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 still the stars shine through the roof. It's oh to be a slave along with a barbarous Turk, where woman has never a soul to save, if this is Christian work. Work, 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 till the brain begins to swim. Work, 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 till the eyes are heavy and dim. Seam and gusset and band, band and gusset and seam, till over the buttons I fall asleep and sew them on in a dream. Oh, men with sisters dear, oh, men with mothers and wives, it is not linen you're wearing out, but human creatures' lives. Stitch, 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 in poverty, hunger and dirt, sewing at once with a double thread, a shroud as well as a shirt. But why do I talk of death, that phantom of grisly bone? I hardly fear his terrible shape, it seems so like my own. It seems so like my own, because of the fast I keep. Oh God, that bread should be so dear, and flesh and blood so cheap. Work, 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 my labour never flags. And what are its wages? A bed of straw, a crust of bread, and rags, that shattered roof, and this naked floor, a table, a broken chair, and a wall so blank that I sometimes thank my shadow for falling there. Work, 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 from weary chime to chime. Work, 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 as prisoners work for crime. Band and gusset and seam, seam and gusset and band, till the heart is sick and the brain benumbed, as well as a weary hand. Work, 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 in the dull December light, and work, 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 when the weather is warm and bright, while underneath the eaves the brooding swallows cling, as if to show me their sunny backs and twit me with the spring. Oh, but to breathe the breath of the cowslip and primrose sweet, with the sky above my head and the grass beneath my feet, for only one short hour to feel as I used to feel before I knew the woes of want and the walk that costs a meal. Oh, but for one short hour, a respite however brief, no blessed leisure for love or hope, but only time for grief. A little weeping would ease my heart, but in their briny bed my tears must stop. Every drop hinders needle and thread. With fingers weary and worn, with eyelids heavy and red, a woman sat in unwomanly rags, plying her needle and thread. Stitch, 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 in poverty, hunger, dirt, and still hear the voice of Dollars pitch. Would that his tone reach the rich. He sang the song of shirt. And I suppose I've always been haunted by the poverty of industrial England. I've always been haunted by William Morris for that same reason. And of course, the moment I started reading Dickens to my father, I started on the Dickens illustrations. And my youth was accompanied by the charming ghouls of George Cruikshank, the strange, grotesque exaggerations of his etching needle, and the strange, grotesque exaggerations of Dickens himself. And I suppose I've never, as a result, totally escaped from being somewhat grotesque myself. My taste in poetry is somewhat Catholic, just as my taste in books is somewhat Catholic. And my father, having got me to read Dickens, I suppose, also got me to collect books. And I can remember almost the first book I got. And it was exactly the sort of book that a somewhat priggish and aspiring, silly little boy would buy. It was very cheap, and it contained the absolutely complete works of Charles Lamb. And I suppose I'm probably about one of two people in the whole of the state of California who has ploughed through almost all the works of Charles Lamb. And the rewards on occasion are somewhat slender. On the other hand, the rewards on other occasions are somewhat marvellous. And I can't resist reading you a poem which I suppose in adolescence is particularly appealing because of its obvious sentimental sadness, but which is not in some ways totally inappropriate to this particular occasion. I have had playmates. I have had companions in my days of childhood, in my joyful school days. All are gone, the old familiar faces. I have been laughing, I have been carousing, drinking late, sitting late with my bosom cronies. All are gone, the old familiar faces. I loved a love once, fairest among women. Closed are her doors on me, I must not see her. All are gone, the old familiar faces. I have a friend, a kind of friend has no man. Like an ingrate, I left my friend abruptly, left him to muse on the old familiar faces. Ghost-like I paced around the haunts of my childhood. Earth seemed a desert I was bound to traverse, seeking to find the old familiar faces. Friend of my bosom, thou more than a brother, why wert not thou born in my father's dwelling, so we might talk of the old familiar faces? Of some they have died, some they have left me, and some are taken from me. All are departed, all are gone, the old familiar faces. One of the things that that kind of book buying which I went in for in my youth, of course, led me to was some very, very strange and remote little corners of the English poetry. And the great and marvellous monuments of Shakespeare and Milton and Wordsworth and Byron and Chaucer and Tennyson beckon in a grand kind of way. But I must admit that I myself, particularly when I'm wanting to illustrate, tend to be drawn to more obscure little corners, to things like this charming poem, if I can find it, yes, by a man who's very well known as a poet, but, oh, is it there? Or is it somewhere else? Here. But is known chiefly as a translator, Edward Fitzgerald. A lifelong bachelor, a lover of paintings, and a strange person with very, very strong personal flavour. This is just simply called Old Song. 'Tis a dull sight to see the year dying, when winter winds set the yellow wood sighing, sighing, oh sighing. When such a time cometh, I do retire into an old room beside a bright fire. Oh, pile a bright fire. And there I sit reading old things of knights and lorn damsels, while the wind sings, oh, drearily sings. I never look out, nor attend to the blast, for all to be seen is the leaves falling fast, falling, falling. But close at the heart, like a cricket, sit I, reading of summer and chivalry, gallant chivalry. Then, with an old friend, I talk of our youth, how 'twas gladsome, but often foolish, forsooth. But gladsome, gladsome. Or to get merry, we sing some old rhyme that made the wood ring again in summertime, sweet summertime. Then go we smoking, silent and snug, naught passes between us save a brown jug, sometimes. And sometimes a tear will rise in each eye, seeing the two old friends so merrily. And ere to bed go we, down on the ashes, we kneel on the knee, praying together. Thus then live I, till, mid all the gloom, by heaven the bold sun is with me in the room, shining, shining. Then the clouds part, swallows soaring between, the spring is alive and the meadows are green. I jump up like mad, break the old pipe in twain, and away to the meadows again. And I took the greatest pleasure in making some illustrations of that poem while travelling through France with the old gentlemen with their long clay pipes. And then one of them seated at the little chamber organ while the other caroled in an ancient quavering voice. And then a sudden flash of sun and a rush down to the well-remembered meadows of my own childhood, which were water meadows of the Thames Valley. And for me, the business of illustrating poetry is a fascinating and complicated one. In order to make it more delightful, I give myself certain rules. And one of the rules is that I have to do the illustrations in the order in which the poem is written. And then I have to have one illustration for every so many lines. Maybe it's for every line, or every 2 lines, or every 4 lines. And then I have to do the illustrations without consulting any works of reference. That is to say, if I'm not quite sure what an early 17th century chair looks like, I have to make it up. If I can't quite remember how a hose and doublet go, I have to make it up. I'm not allowed to be scholarly, because that takes away from the essence when you begin to get things broken up. The illustrations on the wall over there are to a fascinating poem, and again I think a rare poem. Robert Burton, who wrote the famous Anatomy of Melancholy in the early 17th century, was an extremely eccentric man. He was, to begin with, a don in the University of Oxford, and if that isn't a breeding ground for oddity, what is? I mean, you all know that Will You Walk a Little Faster is only about people going into dinner at Christ Church High Table. And in fact, a snail was a nickname for a professor, and the whiting was obviously a nickname for another professor. And obviously the snail wasn't getting to the grub soon enough. And so wonderfully eccentric those Christ Church dons were. And Burton was one of the most eccentric, and he was given the most terrible and appalling fits of melancholy, when his spirits would sink, past his chest, rip off, through the umbilical, down past the pancreas, leap past the division of the legs, sort of halt a moment in the knees, and then trickle, trickle, trickle slowly down the calves until they were oozing out of his little toes. And the only way he knew how to assuage the depth of his depression was to go down to the River Thames and have swearing matches with the bargees. I won't, in fact, describe graphically the nature of those swearing matches, but he's always attracted me for that reason. I first actually came across his name when reading a wonderful illustrated history of English literature. And I heard about Robert Burton when I suppose I was about 13 or 14, and being the sort of little swot I was, I couldn't help but want to find out more about it, and I thought, of course, that I was the most wonderfully melancholy creature anyhow. And so I asked one of my schoolmasters, who was almost as eccentric as Robert Burton, and he said, yes, indeed, that's a very, 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 very strange and wonderful book, yes, my boy. I think you're a little bit young for it, but you might try. And so I tried, and I discovered it's perfectly beautiful, fascinating, and lovely poem. When I go musing all alone, thinking of divers things foreknown, when I build castles in the air, void of sorrow, void of fear, pleasing myself with phantoms sweet, methinks the time runs very fleet. All my joys to this are folly, not so sweet as melancholy. When I lie waking all alone, recounting what I have ill done, my thoughts on me then tyrannize, fear and sorrow me surprise. Whether I tarry still or go, methinks the time goes very slow. All my griefs to this are jolly, not so sad as melancholy. When to myself I act and smile with pleasing thoughts, the time beguiled by a brookside, or wood so green, unheard, unsought for, or unseen, 1,000 pleasures do me bless and crown my soul with happiness. All my joys besides are folly, none so sweet as melancholy. When I lie, sit, or walk alone, I sigh, I grieve, making great moan, in a dark grove or irksome den, with discontents and furies then, 1,000 miseries at once mine heavy heart and soul ensconce. All my griefs to this are jolly, none so sour as melancholy. Methinks I hear, methinks I see, sweet music, wondrous melody, towns, palaces, and cities fine. Here now, then there, the world is mine, rare beauties. Gallant ladies shine, whate'er is lovely or divine, all other choice. To this are folly, none so sweet as melancholy. Methinks I hear, methinks I see, ghosts, goblins, fiends. My fantasy presents 1,000 ugly shapes, headless bears, black men, and apes, doleful outcries, fearful sights, my sad and dismal soul affrights. All my griefs are jolly, none so damned as melancholy. Methinks I call, methinks I kiss, methinks I now embrace my miss. Oh, blessed days, oh, sweet content, in paradise my time is spent. Such thoughts as this may still my fancy move. Let me not die, but live in love. All my joys to this are folly, not so sweet as melancholy. When I recount love's many fronts, my sighs, tears, my waking nights, my jealous fits, oh, mine hard fate, I now repent, but 'tis too late. No torment is as bad as love, so bitter to my soul can prove. All my griefs to this are jolly, not so harsh as melancholy. Friends and companions, get you gone. 'Tis my desire to be alone. Now well, but when my thoughts and I do domineer in privacy, no gem, no treasure like to this, 'tis my delight, my crown, my bliss, all my joys to this are folly, not so sweet as melancholy. 'Tis my soul plague to be alone. I am a beast, a monster grown. I will no life nor company. I find it now my misery. The scene is turned. My joys are gone. Fear, discontent, and sorrow come. All my griefs to this are jolly, not so fierce as melancholy. I am not link life with any king. I ravish am. Can the world bring more joy than still to laugh and smile and pleasant toils time to beguile? Do not, oh, do not trouble me. So sweet content I feel at sea. All my joys to this are folly, none so divine as melancholy. I change my state with any wretch that canst from jail or dunghill fetch. My pains past cure, another hell, I may not in this torment dwell. Now, desperate, I hate my life. Lend me a halter or a knife. All my griefs to this are jolly, not so damned as melancholy. That's a wonderful poem. Of course, the really terrifying and annoying thing is it's so difficult to try to do justice to a poem in some illustrations, to find the right mixture of the period, of the mood, of the strength of the poetry, of its haunting quality. So that illustrating poetry is in some ways an extremely frustrating activity. On the other hand, as you can see, for me, reading poetry is just about as joyful and wonderful a thing as you can possibly find. And all the more lovely when you can find strange, unusual, and unexpected little poems. But I think I'll end by, I'll read you a couple of poems which I have illustrated, and which are a curious mixture of it's a curious mixture of sadness and determination and social comment. And I think that you wouldn't normally think of them as being sort of poems that one might want to illustrate. And it's a famous poem by Samuel Johnson, and it's full of melancholy, I suppose. Condemned to hope's delusive mine, as on we toil from day to day, by sudden blasts or slow decline, our social comforts drop away. Well tried through many a varying year, see Leggett and brave descend, officious, innocent, sincere, of every friendless name the friend. Yet still he fills affection's eye, obscurely wise and coarsely kind, nor let it arrogance deny thy praise to merit unrefined. When fainting nature called for aid, and hovering death prepared the blow, his vigorous remedy displayed the power of art without the show. In misery's darkest cavern known, his useful care was ever nigh, where hopeless anguish poured his groan, and lonely want retired to die. No summons mocked by chill delay, no petty gain disdained by pride, the modest wants of every day, the toil of every day supplied. His virtues walked their narrow run, nor made a pause, nor left a void, and sure the eternal master found the single talent well employed. The busy day, the peaceful night, unfelt, uncounted, glided by. His frame was firm, his powers were bright, though now his 80th year was nigh. Then, with no throbbing, fiery pain, no cold gradations of decay. Death broke at once the vital chain and freed his soul the nearest way. And that's the poem on the death of Dr. Robert Leggett, who was an obscure physician, who was for a while part of Johnson's household. And it seems to me to have such intimate personal beauty and such wonderful truth. And one doesn't always think of poetry as being concerned with truth, but it's such a simple and complete little poem. And I tried to illustrate it, and I tried to do Dr. Johnson walking in front of St. Paul's Covent Garden, Dr. Johnson coming into Boat Street, and then I was living in Venice at the time, and for some unknown reason, Leggett, when he visited those dark caverns of misery, actually visited some of the more obscure and cavernous parts of Venice. But it's a poem which has always haunted me, and I've always loved it, and I suppose in many ways I'm just simply and happily haunted by poetry. I will read you one last poem, and that will be that. But before I do so, I suppose I should say two or three things. First, I should say how dear so many of you are to me, and how touched I am by your presence here, and the thought that it is in a place where books and poetry are revered, and how inadequate I feel and have felt to every task that somehow has come my way, and I felt just as inadequate to this task, and I must admit that I've tried to scamper through it with the minimum of preparation. Because if I once try to prepare anything, I have to do it over and over and over again, and I'm never satisfied, so that I repose on the bosom of spontaneity, which is a somewhat bouncy, if ebullient bosom. But the last thing that I have to say is a matter of a very different kind, and it is this. My conviction has been, I suppose, almost all my life, that it is not the world of power, it is not the world of calculation, it is not the world of plot and counterplot, it is not the ecstatic world of well-done administration, which is indeed an ecstatic world which we don't often come across, but it is the world of poetry by which we can hope in our ordinary daily lives to be uplifted, assuaged, consoled, redeemed, and saved. And I think it's probably as important to say that in California as it is to say it in Delhi or Johannesburg or Verona or London. Perhaps it's a little bit more important than in some of those places, because the power of the word fully felt is the central power of the human soul, and it has to be spoken, it has to be embodied, it has to be made flesh. And in a university, words still can be spoken. A lecture is first cousin once removed from a sermon. And very few people see sermons in stones nowadays. Even fewer see sermons in classrooms. But without some kind of assertion of our central spiritual energy through the power of speaking and through the power of intense, patent, beautiful speaking, we surely lay waste all our most precious powers. And now, just to finish, if I may, I'm going to read you little Gerard Manley Hopkins, partly because it just has that little extra oratorical quality which I fancy suits me, partly because I think the leaden echo and the golden echo are such wonderful trumpetings, pipings, callings to beauty and poetic redemption. The leaden echo. How to keep? Is there any? Is there none such? Nowhere known sun, bow, or brooch, or braid, or brace, lace, latch, or catch, or key, to keep back beauty. Keep it. Beauty, 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 from vanishing away. Oh, is there no frowning of these wrinkles, ranked wrinkles deep down? No waving off of these most mournful messengers, still messengers, sad and stealing messengers of grey? No, there's none. There's none. Oh no, there's none, nor can you long be what you now are, called fair. Do what you may do what you may, and wisdom is early to despair. He begins, since no, nothing can be done to keep at bay age and age's evils, hoar hair, ruck and wrinkle, drooping, dying, death's worst, winding sheets, tombs and worms, and tumbling to decay. So be beginning to despair. Oh, there's none, no, 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 there's none. Be beginning to despair, to despair, 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 despair. There is one. Yes, I have one. Hush then. Only not within seeing of the sun, not within the singeing of the strong sun, tall sun's tinging, or treacherous the tainting of the earth's air. Somewhere elsewhere there is well, where, one, yes, I can tell such a key, I do know such a place, where whatever's prized and passes of us, everything that's fresh and fast flying of us, seems to us sweet of us, and swiftly away with, done away with, undone, done with, soon done with, and yet dearly and dangerously sweet of us. The wimpled water dimpled not by morning matched face, the flower of beauty, fleece of beauty, too apt to fleet, never fleets more, fastened with the tenderest truth to its own best being and its loveliness of youth. It is an everlasting on. Oh, it is an all youth. Come then, your ways and airs and looks, locks, maiden gear, gallantry and gaiety and grace, winning ways, airs innocent, maiden manners, sweet looks, loose locks, long locks, love locks, gay gear, going gallant girl grace. Resign them, sign them, seal them, send them, motion them with breath and with sighs soaring sighs, deliver them. Beauty in the ghost, deliver it early now, long before death, give beauty back. Beauty, 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 back to God, beauty's self and beauty's giver. See, not a hair, not an eyelash, not the least lash lost. Every hair of the head numbered. Nay, what we had light-handed left in surly the mere mould will have waked and have waxed and have walked with the wind, what while we slept, this side, that side, hurling a heavy-headed hundredfold, what while we slumbered. Oh, then, weary then, why should we tread? Oh, why are we so haggard at the heart, so care-coiled, care-killed, so fagged, so fashed, so cogged, so cumbered, when the thing we freely forfeit is kept with fonder a care kept, than we could have kept it, kept far with fonder care. We should have lost it, finer, fonder of care kept. Where kept? Do but tell us where kept. Where? Yonder. What? High as that? We follow now. We follow yonder. Yes. Yonder. Yonder. Yonder.